So this morning I'm just going to fit the timing belt, replace the water pump and the new pulleys. I've been putting it off for quite a while, but it's not very difficult, but I might have to raise and lower the engine a few times off the engine mount. So I made good progress. I've replaced the water pump, replaced the pulley, and I've fit the timing belt backing plate and torqued it up. It's interesting because when I decided to take the car off the road for the turbo project, what actually swayed my decision was the fact that the car was making a whining noise and the alternator also stopped working, so I thought that they were related and the whining was coming from the alternator, but I never really diagnosed any further. But what it actually was that bolt on the backing plate there. It was actually coming undone and it was in contact with the timing belt, and the timing belt was actually melting and starting to fray. So it's really important that you do actually torque these bolts. They're 8 Newton meters, and put a bit of Loctite on them. And while we're talking about torquing up bolts, I torqued up this one to 80 Newton meters and I locked the cam, which is what you're supposed to do. And then I tried to torque this one up, and unfortunately the bolt snapped in the camshaft, so that's pretty much stopped me for today. I'm going to try and remove it later. Me and a friend are going to weld a nut on with my welder, and hopefully we can get the thread out and it can just be a simple case of buying a new bolt. But if not, I'm looking at a set of new camshafts, which I don't really want to buy after doing all this work and getting them in this far. But if it needs to be done, then it needs to be done. I'd like to say it was human error, which it usually is, but I had a torque wrench on it and I was torquing it to 70 and then I go up to 80 then. That's not really something you have to do, but that's just what I do. So I know when I'm nearly there, but it didn't even work. I didn't even get to 70, it just snapped. So that's a real bummer. But yeah, it's really important you do torque your bolts, because obviously if that bolt can't hold 80 Newton meters, then it's better to find out now than when I'm on a dyno and the bolt goes then or whatever. So we use my welder to get the snapped bolt out of the camshaft. There's my welder over there.
There's the bolt.
And there's the bolt.
Nut.
My friend Steve welded the nut on, and we managed to undo it then. So if you ever wanted to know what a heaven sent angel looks like, well, prepare yourself. There we go, that's what they look like. Not really something you want to remember, but never mind. At least I don't have to buy a new set of cams. So I've had to go to a colder spark plug because I'm obviously turbocharging. I don't fully understand the way that hot and cold spark plugs can affect the engine, but I do know that the BCR ATS NGK spark plugs, they're the ones that people use, and people are using them up to around 350 horsepower. I don't think it really works on brake horsepower, but it is basically the go-to spark plug on a turbo 106. So I'm just going to fit the spark plugs now and torque them up. I don't usually use a torque wrench for spark plugs, I just go by feel, but I've got a torque wrench and I know the torque rating, so I'm going to do it. It's 25 Newton meters. I'm going to be taking my oil feed from here. On the block you can see on the right there is 2 M10 by 1 threaded bolts. You want to take it out of this one That's good for the oil feed for the turbo. Fortunately for me, because I'm obviously fitting the oil pressure gauge as well, I've got a sender unit, and in the kit it came with a T-piece, and they're usually about 15 quid on their own, so quite happy to have the exact part that I needed. So yeah, I'll stick that in and show you how it looks. The T-piece installed. Now I just got to fit the oil sender. So the oil sender will sense the pressure, and it will affect how good the ground is off this wire here, which is coming from the oil pressure gauge, and then it can get a reading then for the oil pressure gauge. So I'll stick that on like that. I could stick it on here too because it's the same thread, I think, but I won't do that because it'd be poking out quite far and it could snap off. So what I'm going to do now is get an M10x1 banjo bolt on the end of this, then a AN fitting and a pipe that will lead down to the turbo. So that's pretty much my oil feed plans. You can also use this here. I think it's a slightly higher pressure, probably because it's closer to the oil pump, but due to the way my turbo sits, I can't really do anything with that. And I would imagine that most people would have the same issue. So if you're having clearance issues, then you can tap out, you can just take the bolt out and use this one on the side of the head. So I fit that now and it's tightened up as tight as it needs to be. The angle changed slightly from when I did it hand tight, but it's all good. And I put a little bit of sealant on the threads too. I'm going to top the gearbox oil up. This is a breather, so you can just pull it off and you put the oil in there. But before you do that, you want to remove this here, and then then once oil starts to drip out of there, that the oil's at the correct level. So that's what I'm going to do now. And just to be safe, I'll torque the bottom one too. Put the cap back on. There we are. Gearbox oil's topped up.